Ladies and gentlemen, guests, panellists, thank you very much for coming to the only pre-election debate where all 7 of the parties represented in Parliament have agreed to take part. Unfortunately, although they're very willing and wanted to take part, the Green Party haven't been able to find someone. But we have 6 excellent speakers. We should have a brilliant afternoon. We do have, just a word to the speakers, we do have 2 hours, which is a lot of time, but not a lot of time to get through so many questions. So if you can, I'd ask you to be brief in your answers so we can hear as much as possible from the audience. And as well as commenting from the floor, please do tweet. You can see the hashtag is Sage15. And in the spirit of concision, I should say who I am. I'm Pallab Ghosh. I'll be chairing the meeting. I'm one of the BBC science correspondents. And as I say, in the spirit of concision, I'd like to start by asking each of the speakers to give a 2-minute opening statement, if they wish to. And as I say, if you could stick to 2 minutes, we'd be eternally grateful. And we'll pick the order by drawing from this envelope. So, the first statement is from Dr. Julia Reid, who's an MEP from the UK Independence Party. Julia.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to start by thanking Dr. Stephen Benn for inviting me to take part in this event. I am one of the 23 UKIP members of the European Parliament, where I am a member of the Regional Development Committee and a substitute member of the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee. A research biochemist by profession, I have a BSc in biochemistry and a PhD in pharmacology, and was head of academic research and laboratory manager at the Diabetes and Lipid Research Laboratory at the Royal United Hospital in Bath for 10 years. I have also conducted research at the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases, the Bath Institute of Rheumatic Diseases. On all 3 institutions, we were working in conjunction with the University of Bath. In addition, I have spent a period of time in industry working at the Marion Merrill Research Institute in Strasbourg and Autogen BioClear in the UK. UKIP is concerned that the UK's preeminent role in scientific innovation and development may be at risk. We believe that university tuition fees should be waived for all those studying science, technology, engineering, medicine and mathematics subjects, to try and revitalise the flow of talent into science and innovation, which is so important to our future. The UK is one of the 10 major manufacturing nations, and as Michael Caine would say, not many people know that. But it is one of the most important reasons why I have been fighting for my country's independence since UKIP was founded 22 years ago. The idea that this country cannot compete on the global stage as a free, independent, self-governing nation is just an enigma to me. I am also, as it happens, a global warming realist, a long-time sceptic of the climate change science orthodoxy, something which no doubt some of my colleagues here will be keen to take me to task for. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for sticking to the time. The next speaker is Alistair Allen from the Scottish National Party.
Well, thank you very much, Pallab, and thank you for the introduction. I suspect we can probably, all of us, agree on a lot of things, certainly that science matters to our culture and to our economy. And that's why the Scottish Government continues to provide university tuition for all subjects, free of charge, why we have welcomed developments in Scotland like the introduction of Scotland's Max Planck Partnership, and it's why Scotland has 4 universities in the world's top 200. But we accept the things that need to be fixed too, like the inequalities which deny many people from deprived backgrounds a career in science. And yet, a cynic, if any exist in this place, might ask what this election had to do with science in Scotland. Scotland, of course, has our own school and higher education systems accountable to another government. Well, there are two things of particular relevance. Firstly, Westminster does still determine what Scotland has to spend on science and on everything else. Even post-Smith Commission, 63% of all Scotland's revenues will continue to be allocated from here. And the second reason is, of course, that it is just possible that after May the 7th, voters may decide to put Scotland's 59 MPs in a position of some influence. We intend to play a constructive, progressive role in that debate about spending on science and education, and to provide an alternative to the prevailing consensus there is on austerity. So in future, clearly we would see fewer decisions about Scotland's budget being made in this place and rather more made in Scotland. But whenever those changes come, the Scottish Government is working to ensure not just excellence in Scotland's own scientific institutions, but to ensure the cooperation across institutions, across borders, within and across shared research bodies that will ensure our scientific future together.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we will be hearing from Dr. Julian Huppert from the Liberal Democrat Party.
Well, thank you, Pallab. It's great to be here. We've had a whole series of science debates across the time, normally with me, Greg or his predecessor, Liam or his various predecessors. It's nice to have an expanded team, and it's good to have Greg here even without the DUP. But as a former scientist, of course, I guess a current scientist, I used to do much more research. Science research is essential, and that's true for me, but it's also true for my party. It is the future for our country, the way we will earn our way in the world over the decades still to come. Plus, of course, it's worth doing just for curiosity as well. Research is interesting, even if it doesn't immediately provide economic benefits. And to do well, we have to do three things and get three things right. We have to have money, we have to have people, we have to have the right attitude to research. So money first. I'm really pleased that in this government we've managed to protect the cash ring fence for science and research and more capital. That's good, but it doesn't go anything like far enough. And I spent the last few years, since I produced a very detailed policy paper on science and research, trying to get a cross-party agreement for a 15-year, 3% above inflation ring fence. That's what I think we need to give people certainty. I've failed to get anyone else to sign up to it, and since I can't be sure that there'll be a majority Lib Dem government for all of the next 15 years, we're going to have to keep trying on that. But we should raise spending in real terms as soon as we can do so, and double innovation spend across the country over the next Parliament. That's money. On people. You either get people from here or from overseas. If we're getting them here, we have to sort out our education system, making sure that primary schools all have science specialists, that there are proper qualifications at secondary school. We look at diversity to get the best people in. And we also have to make sure we can get people from overseas where we need them. And lastly, on attitude. You have to have the right approach to getting advice with chief scientific advisors and a chief social scientist, and proper use of evidence in policy making. If we can get this right, if we get enough money, great people and the right attitude, we'll continue to do excellently.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. And now the Science Minister, Greg Clark, from the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Pallab, and thanks, Stephen, for bringing us together. If we ask ourselves how Britain is going to earn its living in the future, it seems to be the best way of answering that question is to look at what you're good at and then to ask whether these strengths are going to be in demand in the years ahead. And when it comes to science, it's not that we're good at it, that we are excellent at it, we're outstanding at it. We win more Nobel Prizes than any country on earth apart from the US. 72%, for those that have endured the ref, 72% of our research is world class. And when you think about the future, you know that as the world becomes better educated, more sophisticated, better connected, these strengths are going to be in greater demand. So I think we need to think of science not as a cost, but as an investment, and one that gives us returns not just economically, but for our society and for our place in the world. But it's a long-term investment. Scientific discoveries don't fit into a 5-year parliament. And all of us, it seems to me, must establish a strong consensus about our institutions and about our funding. Two examples of that, as we've seen, we've protected the science budget during this Parliament, but actually we're increasing for the whole of the next Parliament the capital sum going into science. Those of you that have done postgraduate degrees will have noticed that we are providing funding, public funding, for postgraduate taught degrees in future. Now, elections are a time when points are scored and differences will be aired, and that's quite right. But it seems to me the best service that we could do through this campaign is to commit ourselves to finding common ground for the long term and to build a consensus for science coming out of this campaign that is unassailable.
Minister, thank you very much. And now, Hywel Williams.
Thank you.
From the Plaid Cymru.
Good morning, I'm Hywel Williams. I'm one of 3 Plaid Cymru MPs here, one of the smaller parliamentary groups, but somewhat ahead of the Alliance Party and UKIP and also the Greens. As megalomania beckons, you could say that I have responsibility for a third of the universe, but my background actually is in social science. I used to teach sociology and social policy at Bangor University. Our broad standpoint is that science is good in itself. It's a good thing to do. It works, it's economically productive, and adds to the sum of human happiness. So I think we can all agree on that on the panel. I think it's particularly important to the UK, as we've already heard, because of its economic value, etc., and the way that the UK leads the world in many spheres. It's particularly important in Wales, where we do have equality of research and of application, and we have a research workforce, and some of whom work outside Wales, and we also have a workforce to actually work in science-related industries. I suppose my pitch to you this morning is that innovative and sometimes disruptive developments can occur anywhere within science, not within the usual, I suppose, golden circle where it usually occurs. We, of course, have a very good university in Cardiff, where a great amount of science and very good science goes on. In my own constituency, the biggest employer is Siemens, who make blood testing and lab machines based on the scientific development at Bangor University. Literally a garden shed development, which now employs over 400 people. So that's my pitch, I think. We need to set research free, I think. We need money, we need resources, and if they come in the direction of my country, I'd be very glad indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, speak for the Labour Party, Liam Bird.
Great, thank you very much. Let me add my words of congratulations to you for bringing us together. Like Greg, I hope that there will be a strong cross-party consensus that emerges from this morning that takes us right the way through the next 59 days up until the election and hopefully beyond. And so let me start my remarks by just underlining the absolute critical nature of the science and technology debate for the wider decision that people have got to make at the election. I've said before that I think that we're on the brink of the most extraordinary century in science that we've ever seen. The growth of the world population by 1 billion or 2, the migration to the cities, the fact that 80% of the world's population will not too long be within reach of the cloud, allows a kind of collaboration which will unlock curiosity-based journeys like we have never seen before. And Britain will be at the forefront of rewriting the rules that I think will emerge in this new era. Obviously, in the short term, for our own economy, we have got one big challenge to meet, which is that we have basically, on these shores, got to build a bigger knowledge economy. That is the only way that we allow people to earn their way out of the cost of living crisis that we're currently trapped in. And actually, we are brilliant at the fusion of design, science and technology, and we have been since the very first days of the Industrial Revolution. If you look at what made Matthew Bolton hugely successful in his career in my hometown of Birmingham, it's exactly the same as what makes Jaguar Land Rover successful today. It's that fusion of design, brilliance and technology. In a new XF, there are 100 million lines of code. It's got, I think, 20 times more computer code in a new XF than there is in a Boeing Dreamliner. And it's a beautiful car. It's that fusion of design, brilliance, science and technology that makes us really very good. But there are just not enough jobs in the knowledge economy to go round, and we need an awful lot more of them. That's why science and technology policy is going to be so important. Now, I think Julian is right that the broad agenda to Marshall is around people, ideas and money. That means, from our point of view, that science and technology policy has to be put on a long-term footing. A 10-year ring fence, that's the kind of approach that worked for us in government. We do think that what the Royal Society called the pipeline of talent needs to be much stronger. Crucially, we need to build a British dual-track system that allows people on a vocational, professional and technical path to rise up to degree level skills. And finally, we've got to make some big decisions about getting money right. That's why we think that the budget that's been proposed by the current government, taking 55 billion out of public spending in the next Parliament, will be a disaster for science. We think jeopardising our relationship with Europe will be a disaster for science. We think pursuing the current mishmash of immigration policies will be a disaster for science. And so these are the big choices that I think people have got to get right at this coming election.
Liam, thank you very much. I should also say that thanks for bringing us together due to Stephen Benn and the Society for Biology, so thanks to you. So it seems like we're all agreed that science is important to the economy. Let's hope that we can find some disagreement in this debate as we explore the policies. Now, one of the first question is by Naomi Weir from Case. Naomi, could you make yourself known? And someone will come to you with a microphone.
Thank you. Good morning. We've heard about people, attitude and money. This is very much a money question to kick us off with. So we've heard also about the excellence of the UK, that the UK is one of the most productive nations in terms of science, and despite the relatively low percentage that successive governments have spent as part of our national wealth on science. So if elected, what would your party do? We've heard some of this in your opening comments, but specifically, what would your party do to ensure the UK's potential in science can be achieved in terms of the money? Thank you.
Shall I start with you, Julian?
We have done extremely well on very little. And I think it was Rutherford who said, we haven't got any money, so we'll have to think. And we've managed to make the most of that attitude for a very long time. But it just can't keep going like that. So we have to get much more money in. And that's why I've been trying to get this 15-year, 3% above inflation consent. I know we've talked about it many times. It's good to hear sort of suggestions from Liam. There might be a sort of 10-year look. I didn't hear a commitment to how much money would be in that ring fence, but maybe we can hear that. If there were a majority Lib Dem government, we would do this. One of the areas, I share some of Liam's criticism of the Conservative view. We have to finish balancing the books, and there's then a complete split between the Conservatives, who then want to reduce public expenditure, and we want to then say, right, great, we're out of the worst, now we can start really investing. So we would then start putting a lot of that money back into science research, because it's about growing the economy, growing the wealth for the future. I also incidentally share Liam's comments about spats with Europe not helping. I think we're at one on that one. So we would seek to do that. We fought to get as much as we can into science during these last 5 years, but we have to do much, much more as we start to balance the books. But ideally, it would be that 15-year cross-party agreement, because I think it's really important that when a young researcher is thinking about, do I want a career in research, do I want to stay in the UK, that they know there will be money available. They won't necessarily get every grant, but there will at least be the possibility of funding for a reasonable chunk of their career.
Thank you. Julian, would you like? Where does UKIP stand on science funding?
Well, we would definitely support more funding to go into the sciences. I've spent my life in research, and as those of us in academia know, a lot of our scientists, me included, were employed on soft money. We rely on people being dedicated to research, who often work for free when the money runs out, and actually work for very low wages and no secure, the career isn't secure, and you don't know how long it's going to last. The wastage is amazing. I've seen men have to leave research and go and take jobs as gas fitters or become teachers in order to support their families. And it's such a waste of our resources. And when I started to do my PhD, one of my friend's daughters, she also could have done a degree in PhD in biochemistry, and instead she chose to go into accountancy. And I mean, in 4 years, this is some time ago, she was on 32,000 a year and had a company car. So as you can see, we actually take advantage of the scientists that we do at the moment, and I think we really must put more money into it to pay them back for all the hard work and dedication that they show to our various disciplines.
So you'd increase science funding?
Yes, but obviously I can't see that. Well, possibly there will be a UKIP government. So if UKIP is elected, I will do my best to ensure that funding into sciences will be increased.
Alistair, what's the SNP's position on funding? I mean, clearly we all like to increase funding for everything, but is it realistic? You're in charge of a budget?
Yeah, well, I'm in charge I'm the Science Minister in Scotland, and also have a role as the Schools Minister as well. I think there's a lot of areas that we can look at, and I think firstly, perhaps one that's worth looking at is Europe and the 2020. The attack that there appears to be in 2020 at a European level, I think, is something that needs to be challenged, because it will have knock-on effects on research throughout. But I think that there's also, though, a question that has to be raised, a bigger question about the attitude that we take to the size of the cake as a whole, and the question of austerity. I think that science is one example of an area where, if we mix some metaphors here, turn off the tap, the economic activity that we can produce as a country isn't there to actually help us pay off our deficits in the longer term. I think that there are some false economies being argued, and a consensus around some false economies around austerity that have to be challenged on that. We accept that we have to pay off the historic deficits, the historic debts that Britain has. But I think if we attempt merely to slash them with no thought to what happens to science budgets or other budgets that are likely to create economic growth, we'll create problems for ourselves over the next 4 years. And the other thing I want to say as well, when we just briefly talk about Scotland's budgets around science and around research, obviously it's not the only budget, but of course one of the budgets that is relevant for research in Scotland is the Research Council expenditure in Scotland, and we're very proud of the fact that in Scotland we managed to get 11.1% of that with a population of 9%. But if I can preempt the next conversation, we don't get that through any subsidy, we get it through excellence.
Thank you. Liam, what would Labour do?
Well, I think it is worth recognising the position we're starting in, because I think in the last figures we saw UK spending on R&D fall by about £1 billion, which was one of the first falls as a percentage of GDP since 1995. And this is at a time, obviously, when countries like South Korea, like China, like Germany, like the US, are all moving in the other direction. So we're not in a good place, and we are arguably going backwards, and that's serious. So Labour's position will be to look at 3 or 4 different funding lines for science. Broadly speaking, the science budget, departmental budgets, the money that we get from Europe, and crucially, the university finance system itself. You can't think about science budgets in isolation without thinking of the full range of funding sources. So our policy on the science budget itself will come in a zero-based review that happens after the election. My task, a bit like Julie's, is to argue for that budget to go up. My task is easier because I am not signed up to, and nor is Ed Ball signed up to, a fiscal strategy that will take £55 billion out of public spending in the next Parliament. So Labour and the Conservatives' fiscal path are now very, very different. So whereas Mr Osborne has said the book should be balanced by 2017-2018, both on the current budget and on the capital budget, and all of the money should come out of public spending, Labour's position is different. We've said that debt should be falling by the end of the Parliament. We should be seeking balance on the current budget rather than just the capital budget as well, as early as possible. We think that savings should come from a mixture of tax and prudent public spending cuts. And so what that means is that we don't have to take 55 billion out of public spending. If that happens, let's just be very clear about what that will do to the Department for Business. If you protect the science ring fence, that will take 40 to 50% out of the biz budget. So it will destroy the skills system as we know it. Colleges up and down the country are already working out how the hell they're going to take 25% out of the adult skills budget in September. That's what colleges are currently doing today. You imagine if the biz budget is slashed by 40 to 50% after the election. It will devastate the supply line of science. That is not a fiscal target that we will sign up to. The next point, though, is that you have got to put the university system back on an even keel. The university finance system is going bust. It's going to put billions on national debt by the 2030s, 2040s, because 3/4 of students can't afford to pay their loans back. And so we've said that tuition fee loans should come down. If you bring them down to £6,000 a year and bring in about 3.1 billion in tax subsidy from richer citizens each year, that will allow you to take about 14 billion off national debt over the course of the next Parliament, and many billions more by the 2030s, 2040s. So unless you strengthen the relationship with Europe, where £1 billion worth of research funding comes from, unless you get the right fiscal path, unless you get universities back on an even keel, you haven't got strong foundations for British science in the years to come. And that's the case that we'll be presenting at this election.
In a general sense, you're for spending as much in science as you can, but what do you imagine you'd be able to do? Is it the current situation where there's a freeze and no further cuts, or would you look to increase in real terms? What would your
Well, like Julie, I mean, my target is for the budget to go up. I mean, I've said before that I like what they've done in Germany, setting that long-term goal of 3% of GDP. I think that is a virtuous
Well, Tony Blair had set that and he didn't achieve it.
Sure, and it's hard to do, and it will be harder to do if you destroy the public funding base for science, because as we know, public spending on science crowds in private investment. So if you let the university finance system go bust, if you take 55 billion out of public spending, there is simply no way on earth that you're going to continue to crowd in the private finance that we need for science in the years to come.
Forgive me for striking a discordant note here, and I think
Please do.
we can. I hope to be the first. We can agree on a lot of things, but surely, if Labour, as it did, voted with the government in recent weeks to remove £30 billion essentially from the budget for the next Parliament, it's difficult to see how that squares with a science budget or any other budget that's going up.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that you can move the science budget up over the course of the next Parliament, but you've got to have 2 or 3 things right. The first is that you've got to seek a balance on the current budget, not current and capital. Second, you've got a debt target, I think, you should have a debt target of falling debt by the end of the next Parliament, not a balance by 2017, 2018. But crucially, and I think this is probably an area where we'd agree, you've got to connect your deficit reduction plan to a mixture of public sector savings and tax rises. Loading everything onto public sector cuts just means that an awful lot is going to have to come out of the Department for Business after the election. Now, I think that fiscal strategy is perfectly compatible with an ambition to raise science spending. But let's not ignore what you've got to do to the university finance system and to the European relationship as well. You can't take these pieces apart.
Yes, there's lots of questions that Liam's raised for you, but let me just come to Hal first for your answer to the question.
Yeah. You won't be surprised to hear there's some agreements at this end of the table, given that both our parties voted against the parties to the right of me, interestingly, on the 30 billion cuts. We were absolutely, definitely against. So, there is a question about the actual size of the cake, as someone characterised it earlier on. And you won't be surprised to hear me say either that's what I want to see, is spreading the money about a bit more, spread the fertiliser so the plants will grow, turn off the tap and the plants will die, as it were. Speaking as someone who used to work at the university, I think long-term security of funding is a really important issue, and I would like to see that's being given much more attention and, of course, growth in the budget. There is a particular issue in Wales, as some of you will know, fees in Wales are 3,000 rather than 9,000, which has encouraged young people to go into our universities, and for some of them actually to leave Wales to work elsewhere. That is as much of a problem for the Welsh Government as the 9,000 level is here, given that they are strapped for cash. So we will not only be looking to this election, but also the 2016 Assembly elections in Wales, the Scottish elections, of course, where there is another bite available at the apple. Just one minor-ish point, if I may, Chair. I would like to see in my own field of interest much better coordination between university research departments and the people out there, as it were. I'm looking specifically at medical research, for example, where we have innovative developments in Wales possibly coming along. For example, the integration of health and social care. It's an obvious one. Then you have a very large population that you can get at for research purposes in a much more straightforward fashion. So that there are practical things which arise out of the rather sterile policy debate that you sometimes hear here and also in Cardiff, and there are possibilities not only here but also in Wales.
Thanks very much. Minister, I'm sure you'd like to answer some of the points that have been raised, but can I kick off by asking you whether you, like your predecessor said, are proud of the ring fence, but at the same time acknowledge the fact that the result has been spending on science has gone backwards in real terms. The massive withdrawal of capital spending in the 2010 autumn statement was devastating for many parts of the science space, which has only started recovering thanks to the dollops of cash that have been coming to the Treasury, often in return for photo opportunities, and has perhaps skewed the budget which would otherwise have been spent by the scientists on what the scientists wanted it spent on.
I don't agree with that, Pallab, and I'll say why. And we set out in the Science and Innovation Strategy a view 10 years forward, reflecting all the points that have been made, that you need to have confidence about your arrangements for the future. But I think the points that you've made, and the reason that I'm proud of the fact, and I can't claim credit for it, it was David Willits, my predecessor, who argued successfully at a time when budgets were having to be cut right across the public sector, that actually the science resource spending should be ring-fenced. But it does illustrate the connection between science and the economy. Because I've no doubt that all of us around this table, it's Julian, it's Howell, it's Alistair, whether it's Liam, as the people responsible for science will make a passionate case for science in our parties. But it is connected with whether you can then, whether the economy is delivering so that you've got the resources to pay for that. And the reason that the ring fence was necessary and was an achievement was because of the savings that had to be made because the economy, and more pertinently, the public sector was spending too much. And Liam, sorry to be personal, was the man who did leave the note in the Treasury to the Chief Secretary saying there was no money left. That is the reason for the ring-fence. Let me finish there.
This government has now borrowed more in 5 years than Labour did in 30.
So there is a connection between the two, and that's why I think you do need to depend on a strong economy. And Liam is not able, perfectly properly, to make any specific financial commitment that I've no doubt that he will argue the case as I do vigorously. No, the spending review, as Liam says, is the time when these decisions are made. But a couple of things. In the Science and Innovation Strategy, we don't duck this issue. I said that science should be an investment. The Science and Innovation Strategy is a joint document between my department and the Treasury, which represents the whole of government. And there is a statement made there right at the beginning of the foreword, which says very clearly the UK has historically invested less in research and development than our competitor nations. Addressing this crucial challenge requires both public and private sector commitment. So we're absolutely clear about the fact that we need to invest more in science and in research. It is an investment, as I say. In terms of what's an insight into whether that is simply warm words or whether it has substance behind it, if you look further into the document, when it comes to science capital, it's rather unheralded, and not many people have noticed this. But actually, what this Science and Innovation Strategy does is commit for the whole of the next Parliament, in fact, for the first year beyond the next Parliament, a capital budget rising with inflation. Now, that was a deliberate choice made in the last few months, captured in the strategy. And I think that reveals the preference, if I can put it that way, to regard investment in science as something that does need to increase over time. And in a difficult financial situation which continues, a decision has been made not just to ring-fence in a flat cash way, but to invest a inflation-proofed amount in capital. So when it comes to the spending review that all of our parties, if we're in government, would go through, I think you can see the demeanour of this government in terms of what it regards as the necessary commitment to science.
Thank you. I think we could kind of spend the whole 2 hours on this issue, but there are other interesting questions to get through. But I would just like to hear from Naomi for her reaction to what she's heard. She is acting director of the Campaign for Science and Engineering.
Thank you. I suppose it's that thing around investment in science being an investment and not a cost. And just one of the interesting things is how would a government ensure that that investment is actually investing for the long term and not counted as a cost per se by the government, whoever they may be made up of. So clearly are long-term benefits for all, not just those who are in science, but also those across the country. And so making sure that that investment really is secure and for the long term would be very beneficial.
I'm sure everyone around the table will be making the argument, whoever's in number 11 Downing Street, and they're the people that need convincing. Now on to our second question, which is by Dr. Alexander Howe from IChemE. I beg your pardon, Alexandra.
Yes, that's right. We at the Institution of Chemical Engineers are an international body, and we recognise the importance of promoting collaborations at this level. So we'd like to ask, how can we continue to support the advancement of UK science and engineering if we restrict immigration of those who wish to study and work here? Thanks.
Julia, it makes sense to come to you. Now, just get clear that the party's now in favour of a point-based system, so forgive the confusion, a points-based system, so that would mean that we'd get lots of scientists allowed to come in under UKIP's policy, is that correct?
Yes, we've never said, UKIP's never said that we're against immigration per se. We have said that we are in favour of a points-based system similar to that the Australians use. And if people have the skills that we need in this country, they would be welcome. And that sciences, the doctors, the medical doctors. So I can't see that that would be an issue. Chemical engineers, obviously, as well. So we wouldn't be stopping those coming if they wanted to come.
Do you feel there'd be an increase? Whichever scientists you felt universities needed would be able to come in under your system?
Well, who knows? It's up to the point-based system. We'd have to see what would... I mean, at the moment, the system we have discriminates against people coming from the Commonwealth because we have so many people coming from the European Union who have a right to come here to live and to work. The only way that the current government are able to limit the numbers coming here is to actually discriminate against people coming from the rest of the world. So we would hope to address that.
Greg, you're probably in a difficult position in this, in that you can kind of see the sense in getting the best possible researchers, just like we can get the best footballers into the Premier League quite easily. Because of your party's commitment, which is to achieve in controlling immigration, you can't do what you, I'd imagine personally, think is the right thing to do, and to allow more highly qualified scientists and students to come in and study science. Is that policy going to change? Are you perhaps going to move to a more UKIP-style policy of a point system?
No, well, actually, if you look at the record, the number of overseas students has actually been increasing in recent years, and not just over the last few years, but if you look at the applications from UCAS for entry next September or October, they're projected to rise again, I think, by a 4% increase next year. I have a very clear view on this, and when I said at the beginning that we should see science as an investment, overseas students coming to study in UK universities are an investment for the future. They are an export earner at a time when we want to have exports. They contribute to the excellence of our institutions. When people go and work in countries overseas, having studied or worked here, they have contacts that advance our position in the world. We are second only to the US as a destination for overseas students. My ambition is for us to overtake the US and to have more students coming here to study than the US, and that they will have the most cordial of welcomes. In terms of the policy, the policy has been very clear that there is no cap on the number of overseas students coming to study here, and there won't be. And I and others regularly visit other countries. I was in India just before Christmas. making the point that the UK is as a destination for overseas students is not just a fantastic place to study, but a very welcoming place, and I think we need to get that message across.
So, Julian, it's your policy too as part of the coalition. Have the Royal Society, the Wellcome Trust, the Society of Biology, the other academic institutions got it wrong when they see that the cap that your government has put in place has been damaging?
Well, I mean, firstly, the target is not agreed by the government. It's something the Tories wanted. It's something the Home Secretary pressed for. We've said many, many times, Vince Cable's been outspoken about it, it's a silly thing to do, it would never work, and it turns out it hasn't worked. And in fairness to Greg and David before him, they've been arguing with us against the Home Office. And it is very much the Home Office who caused the problems here, because international education is a huge export earner for us. And as a country, it is simply absurd, but barriers in the way of exports. And it is also about the future. It's about the world leaders. It's about the business leaders of the future who should have a connection here. So you have to get the policy right, and that means getting rid of the fairly silly targets. It also means bringing back things like post-study work visas, and we've been very clear that's something we'd like to do. It was a very good thing when the last government did it. It should be there. But as well as the policy, it's also about the messaging. And people around the world get the message that Britain is not welcoming. The go-home vans were a particularly daft example of that. Again, a Home Office innovation no one else knew about. But that sent a devastating message. And I hear that from businesses, from English language colleges. The effects that has had have harmed us massively. The other thing you have to get right is the competence of the system. A UK Borders Agency was set up because the Home Office wasn't competent at dealing with the visa system. UKBA was not competent at dealing with it. It's now been scrapped and brought back into the Home Office. It is still a massive problem. One of the things that puts people off is that things may go wrong in the process. I fought very hard to get Tier 1 exceptional set up so that brilliant scientists could come here far more easily. Why should we have something for elite sports people and ministers of religion, but not for scientists, for engineers, for people like that? But what I hear from University of Cambridge and others is that people don't want to go through it because there's too much risk of the Borders Agency, now the Home Office, somehow deciding they're not excellent enough. And good scientists don't want to apply to come here to be told, the Borders Agency, who know nothing about you, think you're probably not excellent. So you have to have a system that makes it much, much easier. Yes, clamp down on the abusers, fine. But it has to be positive, it has to be welcoming, and it has to be competent.
Liam was murmuring that the policy was actually in the coalition agreement. Is that correct?
No, I don't think it's right at all. We can check afterwards, but it's something we have never thought was a sensible idea, precisely because the only way, and we've said this at other discussions that we've done, the only way to make sure enough people, you get net migration down, is to get enough people to leave the country. And driving people away from this country is not a very sensible thing to do.
How?
I've always thought that it's peculiar that the coalition has an agreement, and sometimes they don't have an agreement. It's it's the old being slightly pregnant story. Peculiar. I'm very glad to hear from Greg that there's absolutely no problem at all. My experience as a constituency MP with a large hospital and an university which has lots of foreign students is that the Borders Agency was blundering beyond belief in many cases. You wouldn't think that in rural, white, Welsh-speaking North West Wales you'd have lots of immigration work, but I do. And it is because of a direct consequence, I think, of the way that the policy has been applied. So there's a question here about process, and I think the process has been fairly awful for lots of people. We've excluded people. We've excluded people who have then got back into the country and then have become entrepreneurs. I have a case a few weeks ago of someone who was doing actually a business degree, a higher degree in business, and has had lots and lots of problems because she's now setting up, I think, a third business, and also might have to leave for Singapore. The way the process has been worked has been bad, but I think also, the principle that we might actually have to judge between the excellence of one researcher as compared to another. I think, again, that is very counterproductive. Wales, and I know Scotland, is very welcoming of people who want to come to our country and add to our science base, our research base, and our economic base. If I could just quote a former president of my party, Dr. Gwynfor Evans, who said, anybody can be Welsh. as long as you're prepared to take the consequences.
Just very quick, I've just checked the coalition agreement. The 100,000 is not in there. So.
I know, but the principle of the target.
No.
Is. I think I'm not sure the number is.
Let's hear from Alistair. Will there be a kind of point system for English people?
It works the other way.
No is the answer to that. I think one thing that I find when I'm going around universities as Science Minister in Scotland is that there is just an overwhelming sense of impatience with the UK's stance on this, and the abolition of the postgraduate study work visa, which allowed and attracted indeed people from all around the world to work in Scottish universities. And people who knew that when they were studying there was the prospect of some kind of chance of a job thereafter. And it must be said, the kind of jobs that would immensely benefit Scotland and indeed Britain, the kind of people that would benefit us. And I really find it astonishing that we're in this position. I mean, there is progress on this front. The Smith Commission that's been set up to talk about some fraction of the powers that people in Scotland want, is looking at the issue of the postgraduate study work visa. But there is an underlying problem here, which is I think that the rhetoric which has driven the policy at the UK level has been deeply, deeply unhelpful. And much as I agree with everything that Julian has just said here, he doesn't need to Google whether it's in the coalition agreement or not. He is a minister in the UK, sorry, he is not personally, but his party is represented by ministers in the UK government. And certainly if I were to stand up and say I didn't like what the Health Secretary in Scotland was doing, I would be sacked because of the doctrine of collective responsibility. And I think it's about time that the Lib Dems bore some of that collective responsibility for this. So the answer is no, we're a welcoming country. We're desperate for more people from all around the world to study in our universities.
Thank you. I suppose the reason for the policy is that there is deep concern among the public about immigration. So they want to see something to control the flow of people into this country. And Liam, is there a way of addressing that concern without shutting off the doors to scientists and other people that have got important skills?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty optimistic about this, because I think actually the public is incredibly sophisticated about immigration policy. And it's something that I've talked a lot in my constituency about for the last 10 years. When I was immigration minister for 2 years, I drew very heavily on constituency discussions that I'd had. And so people are very clear about the kind of migration which they want to see more of, and students and scientists are absolutely something that people want to see more of. And we should be really honest in this election about where we are at the moment. I mean, 2014 saw the first decline in the number of international students for 29 years. So the number of students coming in, number of entrants from India and Pakistan, for example, coming into English universities has halved since 2010. I mean, this is quite serious, and so the threat to migration policy is not Greg Clark, I'm pleased to say. It is Theresa May, and so when we have ideas floated, as the Home Secretary did recently, about moving towards zero net migration or tampering again with post-study work visas. The Times of India front page headline was UK to kick out foreign graduates to curb immigration. So when I went to Delhi University last Easter to talk to a group probably about this size of young 18, 19-year-old Indian students, all the questions were, why don't you want us to come anymore? That's the reputational damage that has been done despite Greg's heroic efforts. And Julian's right to say that when you have vans driven around places like Birmingham with Go Home emblazoned on the side, then the international students don't have the warmest of messages to relay to their friends and family back at home. So there's a couple of things that I think we are going to have to do. We should take students out of the net migration target. I think there is some consensus across some of the parties about the virtues of that. I personally think that we should bring back the kind of post-study work visa that I introduced when I introduced the point system back in 2007, that would allow students to, in effect, extend their leave for 2 years, then apply for a further 3 years, taking them up to 5 years here, allowing them to apply for indefinite leave to remain. And third, I mean, the reality is that the reputational damage to Britain's recruitment efforts abroad is such that I think that we do need something like a Prime Minister's Initiative Mark III in order to reboot some of our migration efforts. And I think people who care about this issue in universities and in science and in industry have got to take quite a cold, hard-headed calculation about which party and which government is going to get this right in the next Parliament. If you're running Jaguar Land Rover, or if you're running Rolls-Royce, or if you're running British Aerospace, you know that we're 50,000 technicians short a year. You've got a skills crisis now, right now, and that is getting worse, it's not getting better. So if you want to keep that business and grow that business in the UK, you have got to ask yourself, is it going to be Theresa May or is it going to be Yvette Cooper that gets this policy right in the next Parliament? I can tell you who I think will have the right answer.
Could I just... Let me ask Greg to come in and then I'll conclude.
Just come back on some of the administrative points that some have made. Every country in the world has an immigration system that needs to be administered, and one of the problems that we have, I don't think it's a partisan point to say, is that the system was not working. It was, I think, to quote the expression, it was not fit for purpose. It was determined to be as such. I'm afraid when the last government were in office. So the system has had to be reformed. Now, when it comes to India, has there been a perception in India and Pakistan that it has been harder to come to universities? Yes, there has been, and that needs to be corrected. But part of that perception has come about from the closing down of some bogus, not universities, but colleges, that were giving a bad name, not just to our immigration system, but actually to UK education. So it was absolutely right to insist on proper standards and proper process. When it comes, but of course, any administrative is going to throw up consequences that are unintended. I've established with the Home Office and with Universities UK and the Indian High Commission a group that meets regularly to look at categories of problems that arise so that we can get to the bottom of them and solve them. That seems a sensible way to proceed. But I do think it's incumbent on us all when we're visiting overseas countries, and actually when we're talking here, to send the message that actually overseas students are welcome. If there have been concerns in India that isn't the case, then we all need to, I think, take what opportunities we have to point out that across the board of universities, more students from overseas are coming here than ever before. They're getting through the visa system, and so there is a positive message here. We should not send a message out that it is just too difficult to come to the UK.
So will Theresa May say that?
Yes, of course, our policy, the policy of the government, and Alison was quite right in saying that, of course, policy has to be collectively agreed. The policy that is relevant here for these discussions is, should there be a cap on overseas students coming to the UK? There isn't. That is government policy.
It's not the only policy that matters.
It is the relevant.
Wanted to get in, Julie.
Well, it was just to echo what Liam said, and that's historically we've had about 100,000 students come yearly from Australia and New Zealand, and that's now down to 30,000. So it really is having an effect.
So go, just very briefly.
Well, this is not a rhetorical point, but you introduced the subject saying that there was deep public concern about immigration. I think that's actually overplayed sometimes. But I wish there was equally a deep public concern about the reputational damage that the current events are having. And I would say that it's not just a matter of responsibility for the people around this end of the table, but also for the science and engineering community in civic society in general to raise this issue. It's not just for us, I think, it's for you as well.
Briefly, I don't disagree with the point about the bogus colleges. I think everyone agrees that the bogus colleges needed to be dealt with. But since that has been dealt with, I continue to have the point, and I make this point in all positivity, and as I've indicated, I'm someone who's advocating for people to come here and become particularly postgraduate students from all around the world. There has been a perception, it's been mentioned by others, particularly in India, in some African countries, that an obstacle has been placed in the way, particularly of postgraduate students. And to pick up on the point Julia made, the reason why this is happening in some Commonwealth countries is not because of the existence of the European Union. It's happening because the UK government has told a number of countries that there are obstacles in the way of their students getting a job if they come here.
I think we should move on. It's another topic we could spend the rest of the morning talking about. But I would like to come back to Alexandra. First of all, forgive me for getting your name wrong, but I'd say that it was my tribute to Sir Robin Day, who was the first chair of Question Time, who'd often mistake men for women and women for men in his latter days. But anyway, what are your thoughts on what you've heard?
I guess we'd just like to reiterate that we consider 21st century science and engineering to be boundaryless, and that we need an immigration policy that reflects that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, third question is by Dr. Mark Downs of the Society for Biology. Mark.
Thank you very much. We've heard this morning a lot about how excellent the UK is at blue skies research. Long may that continue, it's very critical. The other side of the coin is exploitation of research and development, where we haven't had such a strong track record over recent years. So my question to the panel really is, what would your party do to improve the relationships and cross-working between industry and academia?
Craig, your party's done quite a lot.
Well, let me mention just a couple of things. One is that people are important to this. And I think there has been a problem that we've had, that beyond the undergraduate level, it's been quite difficult for students in this country to study at master's level, for example. And that is an important way in which advanced learning can be taken into the workplace. And we know, and I dare say all of us that visit companies in our areas know that there is a great demand and there's a very high level of employment for people qualified to masters and beyond. So one of the things that we've done, and I'm most proud of in the last few months in the Science and Innovation Strategy, is to introduce this commitment to £10,000 available to support postgraduate study, not just in particular disciplines, but across the range of disciplines that we have. Because I think one of the strengths of UK research is that it isn't just little silos of excellence. The whole integration is very important too. So getting well-trained, well-educated people into the workforce is one very important contribution to that. I think the other, which I think Pallab might have been alluding to, was the network of catapults that have been established. And that was a very deliberate move to, in recognition of the problem you describe, and actually is behind what I mentioned earlier, is this recognition that we need to do more and better. It's early days for them, and Hermann Hauser wrote a report to the government recommending that the German system should be replicated here with some local adjustments. And it's been a tremendous success. I mean, the high-value manufacturing catapult I've visited, and to see the depth of collaboration between industry and academia that the public sector has brought together shows, I think, that we are making progress in that direction. There's further to go. In the autumn statement the Chancellor made just before Christmas, there was further investment backing success, £61 million into the high-value manufacturing catapult. We put £9 million into the research that's going on in the catapult for driverless cars, which is very exciting and growing possibility for the UK. And we've set out an ambition to consolidate, but also gradually to expand the catapult network. So I think there are a couple of examples in the people and in the institutions where the challenge is recognised, and I think we've made some pretty good steps in the last 4.5 years towards helping progress towards a solution.
I'd be interested in your observation to someone who's a newcomer with a fresh eye, in a good sense, to the area, that when tough decisions have to be made on spending, whether what's suffering is a basic blue skies research that can be catapulted into commercial technologies?
No, I think it's absolutely essential. All my discussions in this area have been very clear that to preserve the ability for blue sky research, research without a particular end in mind, needs to be at the heart of our research funding. I think it is absolutely important. Some of our greatest discoveries, some of our Nobel Prizes. It's Paul Nurse, the president of the Royal Society. His Nobel Prize was for something that he didn't set out to discover, but was a serendipitous discovery in working on something else. Now, I think he personifies the lesson that we should absolutely recognise the importance of blue sky research.
Liam, innovation, that's something you'd say, mention the fact that Labour invented the TSB.
Well, I think we've got an awful lot better at it, actually, over the last 10 to 15 years. And, if you look at, some important parts of the country, not least the cluster around Cambridge, or indeed Birmingham or Manchester, you can see these examples now all over the UK. Science-driven growth is getting much stronger, it's getting much faster, it's getting much slicker. And so many of the changes that David Sainsbury made, that Paul Drayson made, I think were wisely conserved and expanded on by David Willits and now Greg. And that long-term stability, that long-term direction is incredibly important. And I think the catalysts are an important element in that, but they're not the only element. There are two other elements which are incredibly important. The first is cities. Ideas, people have been coming together to debate, to kick things over, to invent new things in cities. That was true of the Manchester of the 1780s, and it's true of our cities today. And so the further that we can devolve resources over skills in particular, the better, quite frankly, because it allows cities to begin strengthening the research and innovation base of the clusters that happen to be there and thereabouts. Certainly we think that about 30 billion can be further devolved within the UK, and that's something that we bring forward very quickly. But second, Greg is right to flag people as the powertrain for moving ideas from universities and into action in the economy. That's why it is going to be so important for the next government to set about building this vocational path to degree level skills. The problem that we have got today is we have a terribly disjointed technical education system. Mr. Gove wreaked enormous damage to the qualification system, and I'm afraid Nicky Morgan is pursuing that line of policy. Education reform is not intimately connected with what needs to happen at further education. In further education colleges now, they are now having to contend not just with the cuts to funding at 18-year-olds, but a 25% cut to the adult skills budget. There are colleges that are writing to me from all over the country now that are saying that they are basically becoming unviable. That will, punch a massive hole in our technical education system if we're not careful. But crucially, we have got to radically expand the number of people on an apprenticeship track who are able to go and study up to degree level skills, and that's why we've said that our priority for expanding the higher education system over the next 5 to 10 years is through the expansion of technical degrees, basically allowing people on an earn while you learn track to study up to degree levels of skill. That's a model that is not something that we've invented. It's a model that is working well at places like the Warwick Manufacturing Centre with Jaguar Land Rover, or the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield with Boeing. We know, our colleges and our universities know how to do this, but we need to prioritise the expansion of that particular kind of provision. But crucially, we've got to hardwire it into a British dual-track system. Can't just import the kind of thing that works in Germany, but we can build a British version of the system. That means technical education for everybody from the age of 14. It means rebuilding something old-fashioned called a career service. It means giving people a gold standard technical qualification like a technical baccalaureate at the age of 18. It means radically expanding the number of level 3 apprenticeships, we think by 80,000 over the course of the next Parliament. And crucially, it means radically expanding the number of apprentices who have the opportunity to go on to degree level skill. That is the way that we can actually build a clear flight path for somebody from the age of 14 up to degree level of skill, but on a professional, vocational, technical path. That, I think, will be one of the most important ways in which we can take ideas from the lab into industry and actually unlock a very different kind of relationship between, in particular, SMEs and universities for the years to come.
Do you have any concern about the tail perhaps beginning to wag the dog, that perhaps there's been an erosion of that Haldane principle, particularly with the way in which some of the capital funding has been put into areas that are seen by the Treasury as to be potentially...
Well, I think that is certainly a risk that we're running at the moment. I think one of the problems, if you don't have good, strong long-term ring fences for capital spending, then you do get ministerial shiny projects syndrome, and certainly there's been lots of accusations of that. And I think there's been a lot of frustration at the lack of transparency around some of the decisions that were taken over the last year. Now, I hope that Sir Paul Nurse's review can actually create a mechanism that allows us to fix a number of these problems around the interface of policy and science. I think politicians actually do have a responsibility to help set long-term direction for public policy in science. I would prefer us to much more firmly root long-term science policy on the kind of grand challenge approach that informs policy making in the European Union. And I think actually we do lack a mechanism where policymakers and scientists can come together to rationally make decisions about, for example, the right balance of spending between different research councils. I mean, the balance of spending between different research councils has remained unchanged since the early 1970s. Now, maybe that's right, but actually the evidence and debate around it is not there at the moment. So actually I hope that Sir Paul Nurse can give us some good advice on how we might fix some of these problems.
Yes. If anyone can solve that one, it'll be him. Alistair.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's fair criticism, and it's a criticism that's been voiced in the past about our ability to invent things but not to exploit them. Your average, typical, stereotypical Scottish pub bore is forever going on about the things we've invented, going on about Logie Baird. We don't tend in the same conversation then to go on about how he spent the rest of his life grimly trying to persuade people to use his invention without much success, and others get in before him. I think there is a fair criticism to be made there. I mean, around the issue of research itself, we've tried to adopt a model that we think is helpful towards innovation and development. The research pools that exist between Scottish universities have that as part of their function, and 156 million has gone into that from the Scottish Funding Council and the innovation centres around those. I think we've also tried to focus in on areas where there's a real synergy, a real community of people who are able to come up with ideas, but also to develop them. So things like stratified medicine, things like sensors, things like aquaculture, oil and gas industry. These are all areas that we've tried to provoke that kind of relationship between thought and actual development, innovation and development and research. I think that the point was interestingly made. I think you made it around education and schools as well. There is a connection in all this. I think developing a culture of science and innovation and entrepreneurship and seeing all these things in the round. Thankfully, although I believe Mr. Gove hails from Scotland, he has had no influence over the area which my portfolio thankfully covers in Scotland, which also includes schools. But I think, as I say, that the point is well made, that we need to break down, and I would agree with you on this, we need to break down some of the distinctions that exist, traditional distinctions between academic paths of study and vocational paths of study. And if we can do that culturally, and a great deal of effort is being put into this in Scotland, if we can break down some of those assumptions from an early age, then we break down the barriers much later on, much further down the process between invention, if you like, and development and application. And I think that one of the things we do need to do, because in Scotland we have now got a record number of modern apprenticeships, one of the things we do need to keep working on is this idea of articulation, to use the buzzword, between different forms of education, to get over the idea from a very early age that you have many opportunities in life. You may not decide to go to university at 18, you may go there through a career, through an apprenticeship, through a place in college, which will give you all sorts of insights that I think they're not the complete answer, but I think they give some of the answers to the ongoing perennial problem about development and its connection with research.
How is it a similar story in Wales?
Yes, indeed, but I mean, we have less control in Wales because of the nature of the powers of the Assembly. Can I just point where to start on this question? Can I point to an interesting document? I used to be on the Select Committee on Science, and a couple of years ago we produced a document on the application of fundamental research and in the commercial field. It's called it isn't called catapults, which we decided against. It's actually called Bridging the Valley of Death, which is a rather better title, I think. And it's an excellent report. And if I can be bipartisan for a moment, Andrew Miller, who chairs that committee, did a really fine job in pointing us in that direction and leading the committee's work. I suppose my long experience of seeing the Welsh Government trying to promote this is that it's difficult to pick winners, isn't it? I mean, we'd all agree with that. I think we have to let people have the heads to some extent and provide them with the resources, provide them with infrastructure. If I can be really parochial for a moment, one of the things that I'm very proud of for my own party, though we are in opposition in the Welsh Government, in opposition to the Welsh Government, we did manage to persuade them to set up a science pack. Whether that's good or not is another matter, but we did persuade them to set up a science pack in rural northwest Wales. We'll see how it works. But I think our commitment is quite fundamental.
I once drew a smile from the Chancellor when I suggested that his innovation policy was one of picking winners. But you'd say that he still kind of values of Haldane principle.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on the Haldane principle. It's not directly relevant to innovation, but what I want to say, in the Science Capital consultation, the Haldane principle, I think, is absolutely essential to our traditions of excellence. If you look at other places where decisions on allocating the science budget are not done according to peer-reviewed excellence, then you embark on a slippery slope to losing your reputation. So in the strategy, we set out that as being a foundation of excellence. And I can report that in the capital consultation, I didn't feel moved to change any of the recommendations that came out on the allocation of that capital from the consultation process. But I think there is something more, and it touches on what Liam mentioned about cities. The role of place is increasingly important. And we know that science and universities do have an enormous local economic impact. Now, there are funds available for this in government and in local authorities and in business. And one of the things that I think we can do with science is to make accessible some of those budgets. I brought to this brief the local growth fund that contains £12 billion of capital over a similar period as the science capital allocation. That is something that should be, in my view, available to science if it can demonstrate, as it certainly can, that this will be a good investment in local economies. But that is additional to, over and above, what is there in the science capital budget. So I think there is the prospect of great buoyancy in the resources that are available if we break down some of these barriers that have kept science without the degree of recognition of place and clustering that is possible.
Firstly, I find it fascinating with Haldane that every one of us will swear blind by it. Though actually nobody can write it down, and it certainly doesn't come from Haldane. But I love the fact that it's become so entrenched nonetheless. Yeah. But to go back to the question, which is a really important one about innovation and what we do have a problem here. Our share of R&D as a proportion of our economy is really quite low by international standards. It's below everybody in the G7 other than Italy. It's well behind where we need to be. It plummeted under the Conservatives. It was then sort of actually fairly flat under Labour. Tony Blair promised in 2002 to get it up to 3% from the 1.8 it was then, and unfortunately it then dipped a bit and then sort of bobbled around. We have not made the progress in that we have to do to be globally competitive. And to get that right, again, it's partly about attitude, and I think we've made good progress over the last decades in getting the idea that there shouldn't be this stark division between blue skies research and innovation, that actually it is a good thing if your idea actually turns out into the marketplace. It's not sort of letting down the purity of your academic research. My PhD supervisor, Shankar Balasubramanian, did some beautiful blue skies research which ended up being Solexa, which is now Illumina, which is leading the world in genome sequencing. That isn't seen as failing to do proper, beautiful research. It's a transformational achievement. So we're getting better on that. You do need people, and that's right, and the graduate student funding is fantastic, something we pushed for, and David Willits kept saying no until he stopped being a minister when he started pushing for it as well. I think he was always on side as the Treasury that was difficult again. And it also means doing a lot more about apprenticeships, the 2 million that we've got so far, and things like university technical colleges. We have one in Cambridge which is working very closely with the companies to provide the skills in biosciences, environmental sciences that we desperately need. It is also about money. And so you have to get more money in. The TSB has done a very good job. I think it needs to be much more approachable for smaller companies as well. I think it's too focused on the big companies and it's not deft enough. But things like Smart Awards, which were created under Labour, scrapped under Labour, reintroduced, are really good. I actually won one with a very small biotech company I set up, which failed completely, but we did win the award. It made a huge difference to trying out what could have been a really good idea. We'd like to go further, particularly in areas with the biosciences and medicine, where there are huge barriers in getting things into the NHS. It is a very, very tough process, particularly if you're looking at diagnostics, if you're looking at devices. So we'd like to see a £1 billion life sciences investment fund to work on that, and also some of the work that George Freeman's been doing to try to get some pharmaceutical involvement earlier in exchange for better deals for the NHS. Things like co-funding with business angels so that more ideas can get started would be a good way to get government money in without falling down the trap of just trying to back the winners and pick them. The other thing I'd just say about clustering, because Cambridge does have a phenomenal cluster. We have, if you count all the surrounding villages, we have a population of about 250,000, and we have just over 53,000 jobs directly in the tech sector. So that's high tech, biotech, clean tech. That is a huge proportion. I'm often asked, how do you make it work somewhere else? I think the reason it works in Cambridge is because Cambridge is quite small. And so people know each other. And there is that human contact that is possible, that people bump into each other. If a small company wants to grow and needs to know something about designing a new type of device, their children probably go to the same school as somebody who does that, or meet them in the pub. It's that small-scale network that makes a very, very powerful difference. That can work in other areas as well, but it is quite hard to get. And I think it's one of the reasons why we haven't seen the same scale in some of the really, really big cities, because people don't bump into each other in quite the same area. So it's a really key question. We have to do a lot better, which is why, as I said right at the beginning, one of the things that we would do is to try to double innovation spend across the economy, including doubling the government contribution towards that in real terms from 2014, 2015 to 2020, 21. That's something which Nick Clegg and Vince Cable were speaking out, I think, last week as a real priority, because it does pay back money very, very impressively.
Can I just say that, I mean, there is a problem on the size issue. I used to say when I was teaching that there are two sociological questions in Wales. Who are you and who are you really? Who do you know? How do you get in? And, it is a phenomenal problem in terms of equality of opportunity for people who have the talents and the intelligence to get on but really can't get in. And I'm not pointing the finger particularly at Cambridge here. It's just a structural problem, I think, in any field.
And it's hard to fix. I mean, I wish I had a good answer of how to make a Cambridge cluster grow elsewhere, because frankly it would be good for the rest of the country if we could work out how to make that happen. We face the problems of having too much coming in at once. But we have, when people like AstraZeneca want to come, they're choosing to come to Cambridge rather than somewhere else in the world. We can't really say, actually, we'd rather you didn't come to Cambridge, go somewhere else within the UK, because they just won't. So the key question is, how do we make it work elsewhere, because we do want to roll that out.
Julia, do you have any thoughts on how we can make it work elsewhere?
Well, I know that academic institutions like Bath make a great effort to collaborate with industry, and I did a sandwich course whereby for 6 months in the second year I worked at a hospital in lab in the UK, and for the third year I went abroad, and so did my peers, and it's the same in all the disciplines. And there's companies like Glaxo and Wellcome, they actually come and help fund and the research, and this collaboration does go on also in electrical engineering. So I think that would be a way for some other perhaps universities to go. Bath is particularly a university based on science and engineering, but anecdotally I know that lots of people who have excellent ideas do find it very difficult to get funding to actually move that idea that they've got on. So we really must try and help to get industry and academia together a bit more, with a bit more investment, because already, as we've heard, the UK are doing brilliant with what limited resources we have at the moment. So just imagine what we could do with just some more money.
Thank you. Mark, what are your observations on what you've heard?
Well, thank you very much. I think a lot of us recognise some of the positive moves which have been made. But when we talk to our private sector members and member organisations, there are probably three areas which they always bring up. One is the incredible importance of a talent supply and identifying graduates with the right skills for employment. The other is maintaining world-class universities, because if we maintain our world-class universities, they're there for the private sector to work with. And the third is the fiscal and investment environment, to retain business in the UK and to attract inward investment. And a key part of that, I think, is the expansion potentially of the R&D tax credit system.
Thank you, Mark. So I think there's a fair degree of consensus on this. I mean, my own observation as someone who's been covering this area for some time is that for years there was this kind of argument about how much to spend in order to innovate, and now it's how to spend it and how to spend it wisely. And there's been a continuity of policy between the governments that I've noticed. But so now to another uncontentious area, tuition fees, asked by Siobhan Gardner of the Society of Biology.
What level should tuition fees be and why?
It makes sense, perhaps, Julian, if you start this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would still love to get rid of tuition fees completely. I was a student when Labour won a general election on a promise not to introduce tuition fees and then introduced them. I was doing my PhD when they said we would never increase them and then voted to increase them. And I signed a pledge to say that I wouldn't vote for an increase in fees, and I stuck to my pledge. I'm quite proud to have done that, being the first MP for Cambridge to actually vote against an increase in tuition fees. We had a Labour MP before who did vote to create fees. So I would like to try and get rid of them. That has to be the best way to do it, because there is a fantastic public good in having people educated. The problem is I cannot work out, and I've looked quite hard to see how to do this, how one could do that while still finding the funding that's needed for the universities. I just don't see how it can possibly be done at the moment. So given that can't be done, and given there are, I didn't support the system that came in, but actually it is a lot better for students in some senses. It means that part-time students don't have to pay fees while they're still studying. It means that people pay back only when they're earning more money, and so people pay back less per month, although for a longer time period. And there was also a lot more bursary support for people from poorer backgrounds. And to my surprise, but I'm delighted to be wrong on this, we've actually seen more people from disadvantaged backgrounds going into universities as a result of the changes. What's been interesting recently is this sort of slightly bizarre suggestions from Labour. I think Ed Miliband promised before his election as leader that he would get rid of, in a few months' time, he'd have a plan to get rid of tuition fees. And instead they've come up with a scheme which helps students who will go on to be very, very high earners. So if a student's parents earn 50k a year each and they earn 50k going up with inflation, they benefit under their proposals by £8,500. Somebody on 25,000, whose parents are on 25,000 a year, they go on to get 25,000 a year, again rising, gets nothing at all. And it strikes me that is not a good use of £3 billion a year. If you want to use £3 billion a year to help students, you need to deal with a problem that actually is facing students. So firstly, that is about the cost of living for people when they are students. Put the money in then, whether it's as bursaries for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, whether it's a flat rate for all students because they need help then. That would be a much more progressive thing to do with the money, and that's where I'd spend the bulk of the money. I'd also then look at the place where there really is a barrier for social mobility, which is the graduate student scheme. And as I said, we've discussed the fact that's now just about to start. That's really, really helpful. That would be the other thing, because people weren't paying undergraduate fees when they started with, there weren't people who simply couldn't afford to do it. But there were people who faced that for graduates. So in the long term, I'd love to get rid of fees, don't know how to do that. What I wouldn't do with £3 billion to help students is to give it to students who are going, or the vast majority of it, to students who are going to earn a lot of money. They're not the people who most need it. And it was described very well to me by a student union officer who said of the Labour proposal, it's great if what you want is a headline, but rubbish if what you want to do is to actually help students.
Julian, if you want to get rid of fees, then why did you sign a pledge against them in the previous election?
Sorry, I want to get rid of fees. I signed a pledge saying that I would vote against an increase in fees, and I tried to get a better option, and I proposed an amendment to say we should get rid of fees. Sadly, nobody else from any other party backed my amendment, which was a great shame.
Julia, where does UKIP stand on fees? Abolish them, increase them?
Well, we believe that students studying the STEM subjects, which is science, technology, engineering, medicine and maths, wouldn't pay tuition fees. We currently believe there are too many students going to university when there's no need for them to go. Nursing is a case in point. Years ago, you could become a sister with 5 O-levels, and they made excellent nurses, and they learnt on the job. Engineering, my husband's a marine engineer. He went to work with Shell at 17, and now he's a brilliant marine engineer, but he never went to university. There's channel to send so many students, many of whom learn a subject that when they leave university they can't get a job. It just seems such a shame and a waste of resources. It was interesting to hear Liam talking about changing the policy for 14-year-olds so that those less academically minded can go into a more technical role, because that's been UKIP policy for some time. And so that's where we feel we could save the money, have fewer students going to university, but really supporting those that actually need to be in an academic institution. To learn to run a golf course and to learn to look after trees, I don't think you actually need to go to a university for that. So,
Julia, thank you. Hal, what's your party's view?
Thank you. I'm one of 6 children brought up in the council estates. We all have degrees or professional qualifications, including postgraduates and PhD. You do the maths. It's an extreme example, but which family of 6 children would take on the collective burden of debts that would face us where we're in that position today? I'm so old, I was actually paid to go to university. I got a grant. I know there are mystified faces around the table here, but that's how it used to be. In Wales, at present, the fee level is 3,000 rather than 9, and I'm sure also we'll talk about how it is in Scotland. I've no idea how the Welsh Government are going to find the money, either to get rid of that 3,000 or to spend it more wisely. I think it's not always wisely spent. But there is a fundamental problem of how do you fund universities, and it is particularly acute in my own country because of our relatively poor economic performance, the low tax take that we potentially might have. In some ways, all I can do is wring my hands, but I certainly say this to you: we have to look at it from the student's point of view, and my own extreme example perhaps isn't the best place to start, but that's what students face. There might be more students going into university, but I worry about the economic, the financial burden that they face and the stress that causes to them.
Alistair.
Well, in Scotland, of course, the position is slightly different. In 2007, when my party became the government, we were elected on a mandate to abolish tuition fees in Scotland, and we abolished them. And since 2008, there have been no tuition fees for Scottish domiciled students who are doing a first degree undergraduate course. And contrary, I think, to some of the news coverage at UK level at the time, we didn't get some kind of bung from somewhere to do that. We had to find that from within our existing resources, and those resources have since, in real terms, declined. So it's been a big undertaking for Scotland to do that, and I offer no advice to other places about what they should do. That's a matter for them. All I can say is that there was a very wide and deep consensus in Scotland that for all the reasons we've just heard, if we wanted to improve access, if we wanted to create a sense of fairness and involvement in the university sector that was shared across the country and across all families across the country, then this was the right thing to do. And we also felt it was in tune with the direction that many other countries in Europe were going. To be honest about it, England is now in the position of having unusually high fees within Europe. We've taken a decision which I think has been the right one. It's not been a cheap one, but I think it has the best prospect in the longer term of us including a whole section of our society who, for all our boasted egalitarianism in Scotland, have never had an opportunity to go to university, but also to ensure that everybody feels they can buy into that university system. I think that it's got great advantages, not just in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of social mobility, but for science specifically, it's a great way, I believe, of attracting people into areas of science to fill skill shortages in our labour market, and to include, as I say, people who wouldn't otherwise go. So it's not just popular, I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's a policy that Scotland will stick with.
Liam, of course, tuition fees was Tony Blair and the Labour government's idea. Critics would say that what it's done is the great beneficiary has been the university sector, even though there's been this huge expansion in the number of students. You're getting lots of people coming out with not all of them terribly good degrees, not terribly useful degrees. Do you have any regrets on the policy? If so, how would you modify it?
Well, back in 2011, the Royal Society published a great report called The Scientific Century, which had a standout line for me, which is that unless we grow smarter, we'll grow poorer. And right now, that's what's happening to the young generation. This young generation coming up through college and university today is the first generation for a century to be worse off than the generation that came before it. And if that continues, as a country, we will go backwards. So we have got to make it easier.
Sorry, worse off because of the debt?
No, because 1 in 6 are out of work, the number of apprenticeships under 25s are falling, and if they go to university, they graduate with £44,000 worth of debt. So the challenge that we've got as a country is how do you build a higher education system that allows many more people to get up to degree level of skill. I don't think we should be sending less people to university. I think we should be sending far more to university level of skill, because that is the only way that we're going to compete internationally. Now, I think we should give students a choice of taking a pure academic route or a vocational route, but university level skill is the only way the next generation is going to get on, and it's the only way as a country we're going to prosper. Now, we've got one problem in the way. The system, as constituted, is going bust. Now, it's true that you can look at a problem like that and you can wring your hands, or you can throw mud at a proposal, or you can promise a post-election review, or you can remain opaque about whether you'll put up fee rises. Actually, we don't think that's the level of honesty that young people, their parents and their grandparents want from political parties in this election, and that's why we put a plan on the table. When fees were tripled, it created a system that was so expensive, 3/4 of students never pay their debts back. That is going to add £281 billion to the national debt by 2030-31. That is not a system that is sustainable for the future. So what Labour said is, look, there are no easy answers here, as Hal, I think, has been very honest. There are no easy answers about this, but we have got to put a plan on the table. Now, if you trust Nick Clegg's instincts, then buy into the Lib Dem policy for a post-election review. I'm no clearer, Siobhan, from Julian's answer, although I know even more about Julian's virtues. I know even less about what will be in the Lib Dem manifesto from the answer that I've heard this morning. The plan we've put on the table is to cut fees by £3,000 to £6,000. That will knock £14 billion off national debt in the next Parliament, ensuring the system is more sustainable for the future. But we have got to put maintenance grants up, because the cost of living crisis has hit students just as it has hit everybody else. So that's why we've said that maintenance grants should go up by £400, and we should extend eligibility right the way up the income threshold to households of £42,250 a year. But the third element of our proposal is that we fully fund it, not at £2 billion, which is what Universities UK said was needed, but at £3.1 billion. That would allow us to put maintenance grants up and ensure the teaching grant is made good. Now, that money has to come from somewhere, and so that we've said that the richest citizens in Britain should lose some of the tax relief that they get on their pension contributions. So if you're on £150,000 and above, actually we say that you shouldn't get a 50% tax relief on your pension contributions, you should get the same as a basic rate taxpayer. If you're saving up for a tax-free pension pot, we say that instead of 1.25 million tax-free, it should be £1 million. And actually, if you're saving tax-free each year into a pension, we're saying that the limit should not be £40,000 a year, it should be £30,000 a year. If we make those changes, we can put the system on a more affordable basis, but crucially, we can put it on a sustainable basis by taking 14 billion off national debt over the course of the next Parliament. So you will hear lots from the parties about, hand-wringing perhaps, or their own personal virtues, their own personal ambitions. You'll hear a lot about post-election reviews. You'll hear very little about people ruling out post-election tuition fee rises. But today it is only the Labour Party that has got a concrete plan on the table. Now, you might not like every aspect of it, but it is a plan that will make university more affordable and more sustainable for the years to come. And above all, it is an honest picture of some of the changes and some of the decisions we're going to need to make as a country.
Greg, I'm sure you want to comment on Liam's plan, but first of all, if I could ask you to answer the question, what level of tuition fees is going to be best for the graduates in this country?
I think it's about right. I think if you look at the success of the policy, we've been talking a lot this morning about how our universities are performing well, and to continue to do so, you need stability and you need confidence. Now, I know that the fee reforms were very difficult for a lot of people, not at least several around this table, but they were conceived actually in a bipartisan way. Lord Brown was commissioned by the previous government to take a long, hard look at it, and his recommendations were followed through. A lot of people were concerned that it would put off people from going to university. Well, the results are now in, and I think it can be seen pretty clearly that the reforms have been for the good. For students, we have more students going to university in this country than ever before, and crucially, more from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. Mary Conant Cook, the head of UCAS, called it a stunning account of social progress, that there was a leap of 10% in a single year of people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, quite some of that progress has been as a result of the access agreements that are funded from the fees between 6,000 and 9,000. In terms of universities, we talked about research funding and the ring fence that was negotiated there. For teaching resources, the teaching resources available to universities have increased by around 25% during a time of economic stringency. And there is the confidence that universities have that if they take in a student, they will receive the fee for that student. So it has been working for students, it's been working for universities. And my concern about Liam's proposal is that it would take this hard-won confidence and stability and plunge us into chaos. For example, Liam says that he's going to allocate £3 billion, but this is from the Treasury. This is an ask of the Treasury, whereas with tuition fees, the universities get it automatically as an entitlement. Now, the idea, and Liam's been a Treasury Minister, and so have I, the idea that universities have to go cap in hand to the Treasury every year just to sustain the income that they've been used to is not only a recipe for chaos. I think it erodes the confidence that has sustained our universities and their excellence. The other thing is it's a very strange choice to take £3 billion, and as everyone acknowledged, I don't think there's any debate about this. The IFS, pretty authoritative on these matters, say the beneficiaries will be the highest earners, and not the highest earners immediately after graduation, but at the time of their life when they're most prosperous, in their 40s. They will stop paying earlier. So to have £3 billion and to use it to subsidise people who are able to pay back their loans, if you're critical of the the write-offs that are provisionally made, then it seems to make no sense to write off the debts of the people that can afford to pay and are able to through their income.
Great.
And the final point, I will come to a conclusion. The final point is this. We've talked a lot today, and I think there has been a consensus about the need to argue the case for more investment in science and innovation. And I'm sure that all of us, given the opportunity, will make that case. But I can tell Liam that when his first visit to the Treasury is to ask very kindly for this cheque for £3 billion, then to follow it up and say, actually, we'd like some more for the research revenue budget and we'd like some more for innovation, I can tell you, I can predict the likely response to that. And that's why the universities, why Universities UK have said that it'll make it more challenging. Liam's policy will make it more challenging to secure investment in research, in innovation and social mobility, all of the things we've been talking about this morning.
But Greg, let me tell you the biggest challenge to sustainability and investment in science, and that is to keep a student finance system that is going bust. And you've said nothing this morning about how you would make the system more sustainable for the years to come. Now, in the budgets that came out 2 weeks ago here in the House of Commons, £4.1 billion was transfused into the BIS budget in order to patch up the hemorrhaging that there is in the student loan system at the moment. And I can say to you, with all my experience as a former Treasury Minister, that the Treasury will not continue those blood transfusions for the years to come. So if you want to guarantee that fees won't rise, if you want to guarantee that funding won't fall, then you've actually got to vote for a plan that is on the table and not a party that will just pretend to you that the current system can go on forever and ever and ever, because it's bleeding to death, and I can guarantee you the Treasury will not allow that to persist for a year longer in the next Parliament.
I know you want to come back, Ms Clark, but I just want to have one last question, and I know you all need to get to PMQs, so if that's okay with you, thank you all. We're going to have to finish after this question because there is Prime Minister's questions times and many of the participants have to get on to that. And I'd ask the question is by William Duncan.
Could I ask, what one policy would each of you bring in within your first 100 days, if re-elected as government, that would make a difference to strengthen UK science?
So what is the one policy you'd bring in as a priority within your first 100 days to strengthen UK science? And if I could just ask for a couple of sentences for that. Let me just go in reverse order. Julia.
Well, if it was personally up to me, I'd like to improve the career prospects for our researchers that we have. I understand from some of my ex-colleagues that some academic institutions are now only employing their researchers for 11 months at a time, so that way they can't build up sufficient years. I was employed on annual contracts, and after 4 years you become permanent. But in order to stop this, as I said, some institutions are only employing them for shorter than a year, which seems scandalous. So I would want to do something about that. And
Julie, sorry, you have to be very brief for this answer. Alistair.
Well, we've talked a lot about the funding of academic science. I just maybe want to take another example of the use of science, and that's climate change. I'm sorry to be at loggerheads already, to be possibly. But when it comes to addressing climate change, I think we have to look at how we generate our power in the country. And I think one thing that could be done at UK level that would be very helpful would be if we revisited the whole idea we have of transmission charges, and the fact that not only do they penalise renewable projects for generation of energy in Scotland, but also in many parts of England and Wales. We have to move away from the old model which penalises you the further away you are from London.
Thank you. Julian.
And there's a lot of things to get started in the first 100 days, whether it's about innovation research funding, education for STEM, diversity, sorting out immigration. But a lot of that takes more than 100 days to take effect. One thing which could take effect immediately is saying the government has to show its commitment to research, its commitment to evidence, by, for example, simply announcing that the government will publish the research that it commissions, so people can see what's happening and how decisions are being taken. That could happen immediately. You can get on with all the rest of it, but it will take more than 100 days to get the outcomes from those other ones.
Thank you, Julian. Greg?
Building on the success of the loan system by extending it to postgraduate students.
Thank you. Oh.
I'm not going to be in government. It's one of the joys of being in permanent opposition.
Never will.
Speak for yourself. It's glaringly obvious to us in Wales. Wales is underfunded. We need money to improve our school performance as a kick-off. So sorry to be parochial, but my party's main aim is to get Welsh levels of funding to be equal to those in Scotland. That's 1.2 billion, by the way, if we talk in big numbers. Just to give you some notice.
And Liam, just very briefly, what would be your priority in your first 100 days as Science Minister?
We'll publish a plan to stop the university system in our country going bust, because if our universities go bust, then there ain't going to be much science worth its name in this country for the years to come. Simple as that.
Well, thank you all very much. I think it's been an excellent debate. Thank you all for making the effort and for giving concise answers. I think it's been a wonderful occasion. Thank you all for coming along, and thanks again to the Society of Biology and to Stephen Benn for organising it. So many thanks indeed.